two, one.
Hi, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to another episode of Business and Legal Q&A Live. Here we are today on June 5th, and could not be in the studio today, so we are on location, if you will. You're going to see some squirrels and birds, and you're going to hear some noises, so just bear with me on today's show. Also, we didn't have our introduction, just simply because logistically where we are could not be done. So excuse that, bear with me, but we have a great show today. And today we're going to be answering a question that I think deserves an answer. And so many lawyers get this question, and they're so disgusted when a client or potential client calls and asks this question. And they don't even, justify why they're telling the client that they will not accept their case. And that question, the legal question that we're going to get to today, is why will a lawyer refuse my case on a contingency basis? Why does a lawyer refuse to take a case or accept a case on a contingency basis? And we're going to get to that today. I'm going to tell you about a phone call that I had just this week, somebody who asked that exact same question. So that's the legal question we're going to get to today. But before we do, I just want to thank today's sponsor. And today's show is sponsored by the Global Influencer Podcast. Now, this podcast is really a top-notch professional podcast. It is hosted by Luna Vega, and the podcast is designed to help fashion e-commerce owners and startups grow their business internationally. Now, we all know that consumerism is changing, and shoppers are making calculated decisions about every purchase that they make. And selling a product in one country, especially in the fashion industry, is just no longer enough. So Luna Vega, who hosts the podcast, she has a, like I said, top-notch show, brings on guests very knowledgeable in the industry about starting up your business as an entrepreneur and the fashion industry. And during the podcast, she's going to guide you through the cultural, logistical, and technical considerations necessary to launch and influence globally. So to bring your brand globally. Luna and her expert guests will cover topics related to digital marketing, growth hacks, business growth, e-commerce optimization, business automation, and more. So if you're interested in this podcast, which I think anyone interested in business or growing internationally, and definitely if you are in the fashion e-commerce world, you need to check this podcast out. You can go over to Luna Vega, that's LUNAVEGA.net, for more information and to subscribe to the podcast. And if you bear with me for 1 second, for those of you who are watching live on YouTube, I will try to bring up the site and show you just how well done this is. So this is the homepage of the Global Influencer Podcast. And as you can see, you can subscribe right through the site, through iTunes to the podcast. And if you take a look at the homepage, you will get a look at exactly what this is all about. Luna Vega has a book, she does consulting, and then there's the podcast. So I encourage all of you out there, anyone looking to influence globally, to bring your brand globally, to take a look at this podcast. All right, so let's get into today's question. And it really started with a phone call earlier this week, and it's just a question that I receive all the time. And I figured, you know what, let's do it live and let's answer this question. So I received a phone call from a woman who said to me, listen, I'm looking for a lawyer. I don't have a lot of money, and I'm in a situation, and I've called 15, 16 lawyers, and I've asked them if they would take the case on a contingency basis, and every one of them told me no, and then simply, refused to speak to me anymore. And I have no idea why. I see these ads on television all the time about lawyers who accept cases on a contingency basis. You don't pay anything, no lawyer fees until we recover for you. And I don't understand why my case is being turned down and why nobody will accept it on a contingency basis. So I said to her, all right, tell me a little bit about your case. And she explained that she was being sued. It was somewhere in the tune or the amount of $15,000 or $16,000 that she was being sued for. And she's looking for a lawyer to take the case on a contingency basis. So I said to her, has anybody ever explained to you when or why an attorney will take a case on a contingency basis? And she said, no, I have no idea. I don't know any lawyers. All I know is what I see on TV. So I said, listen, let me explain it to you. Lawyers take cases on contingency basis, which means that they're not going to charge you hourly any attorney's fees. They're going to take a percentage of your recovery in a case. And I said, the typical percentage is 33%, 33 and a third. And in some cases, a lawyer may negotiate down with you. So in other words, maybe they'll take 25% or 27% or whatever it might be. My point is that a contingency agreement means that the attorney is going to take a percentage of what you recover. Now, that's important because if you remember what I said about the woman who called, her case was a defense case. She was being sued and needed somebody to defend her against this lawsuit. Now, if a contingency fee arrangement is based upon recovering a percentage of what the plaintiff recovers, how could a lawyer recover any money from a case where you're being sued, where they're defending you? And so I said to her, the reason why attorneys are turning down your case is because there is no way for the attorney to get paid. Because if they're defending the claim, there's no recovery. There is no hope of getting money to cover the time, the expense, the overhead necessary to defend the claim. And she said to me, oh, I finally understand it. Thank you so much for explaining it to me. And I thought to myself, if lawyers would just take a little more time with people, just a little bit more time, not be so dismissive, maybe lawyers wouldn't have such a bad reputation. And that's something for me that I probably waste time speaking to people who I know have no case or that I can't help, but I just feel compelled to explain to them because they're not lawyers. They don't understand it. And I felt so bad for this lady because she was in a bind and she's calling all these lawyers and they're not even explaining to her why. All they're simply saying to her is, no, we're not going to take your case, or no, we can't help you. And I think that's kind of reprehensible because I think that it's important as a lawyer to communicate with people, even if they are not going to become your client. And, in conclusion with this woman, I said to her, listen, you're not hopeless. All hope is not lost. There are things you can do. And I explained to her that you can go onto the court's website and you can look up, they call it pro se, it's like a pro se packet. Now, remember in a prior video on our YouTube channel, we talked about pro se representation versus representation by an attorney. And just as a quick refresher, remember that pro se means that you're going to represent yourself in court, okay, not with an attorney. And just another bonus point I want to touch on, if you are a business cannot represent itself pro se. A business needs to have an attorney. And I'll tell you a quick story. A woman called 2 weeks ago. She was going to court to represent her business and was being sued and did not hire an attorney. And the judge would not even hear her argument and found in favor of the plaintiff simply because she didn't have an attorney. So that's pro se. But getting back to what I told this woman with her lawsuit, I said, go on the court website and there's a pro se packet that you can download. Now, this happened to be venued in New Jersey, but other states throughout the country have similar self-help packets. And I said, you can download all of the forms that you need to answer the complaint, and all of the rules are there. And I said, you know what? I am sure as well that I would be willing to work with you and just give you some guidance and advice so that you know how to file the forms and that sort of thing. And I did that. I spent some time with her and we went through it. And she said that she had a good enough understanding to take this on her own and to answer the complaint and try to settle the case. Because ultimately what she had said is that she did owe the money. And, she was really just looking to try to resolve it, to settle it. So that's, what happened. But the bigger question, I mean, it wasn't even so much the lawsuit for her. She just could not understand why an attorney wouldn't take the case on a contingency basis when, you're watching TV at night and you see commercial after commercial about you pay nothing and, we don't recover any fees until you do, and so on and so forth. But it just didn't make sense because she's not a lawyer. So let's talk for a second about when or what types of cases a lawyer will take on a contingency basis. Typically, contingency, right? Remember, you have to recover for the lawyer to recover. So if they're going to negotiate a percentage with you, you need to recover something so that they can take a percentage of that. Typically, personal injury cases, okay, that's a prime example of a contingency fee case. And the way that an attorney figures out whether or not they're going to take your personal injury case is by evaluating your injury. And, every injury in every jurisdiction, in every state, it has a value range, or a range that an attorney is familiar with. So, for example, maybe a torn rotator cuff has a value of between $25,000 and $65,000. So an attorney can kind of gauge the amount of recovery that they're going to be entitled to on their percentage or contingency fee arrangement. And if it makes sense, they take the case. That's how they evaluate it. That's how it works. Now, another type of case where you're going to see contingency fee arrangements is collection cases. So perhaps you have a contract with somebody and they owe you money and they haven't paid you. And you call up a lawyer and you say, listen, this company owes me $50,000. I need you to sue them, but I'd like it done on a contingency basis. So in that case, the attorney would take a percentage of whatever money he or she recovers for you on that breach of contract claim. Those are the top two case types where you're going to see contingency fee arrangements being offered by an attorney. Defense cases, typically never offered, okay, because there's no recovery. They're defending the claim. And oftentimes, you can get very, very frustrated with an attorney who doesn't explain the reasons why they do some of the things that they do. And that's part of the problem that I have with the legal field in general. I think that, a lot of attorneys are very dismissive, and they will just, they don't want to waste their time. I mean, talk about time is money. You're going to get some of these attorneys that won't even speak to you. You speak to a receptionist, and they're trained to say, okay, what is this? Is it a defense case or a plaintiff's case? And then, you say it's a defense case and I want it on a contingency. And then they simply say, okay, sorry, we don't take those kind of cases or whatever. And they dismiss you. Or if you're lucky enough to talk to the attorney, they don't explain to you why they're not interested in your case. They just say no, or, it's not for us, or we can't do it, or here's what you'd have to pay us. And they don't explain it to you. And, you're left wondering, I don't understand why. And that's, quite frankly, why we do this legal business and legal Q&A, because these are really good questions that a lot of people often wonder. And it's very difficult to get an attorney who is counting, every minute of the day in order to get their billing quota in. It gets difficult for an attorney to spend the time to talk to you. And that's something that, in my personal practice that I'm trying to change, because it's very frustrating to be confused about something and to not understand and not have somebody willing to explain it to you. So that is what I told her. And that's the answer to today's question, which is, why won't an attorney take my case on a contingency basis? Now, I just want to explore a little bit further into this topic, and I want to talk for a second about when an attorney would accept a case on a contingency fee basis, but decides not to. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, remember a few minutes ago, I was talking about a plaintiff's case, a personal injury case, and how an attorney evaluates that personal injury case. So let's say, for example, that you have an injury case, but it's very, very minor. Let's say that your potential damages are somewhere in the area of $5,000 or $2,500, and you call up an attorney and you're thinking to yourself, well, Peter told me that if it's a personal injury case, an attorney will most likely take it on a contingency basis. And you call up the attorney, you explain the situation, or he or she says to you, I'm sorry, we cannot take that case. And again, you're left wondering why. It goes back to that evaluation of a case that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So the attorney thinks to themselves, well, what is the most amount of damages that can be recovered? And I know that the value of this injury is $2,500. Now I'm going to have to put in so much time and effort that I'm not going to be able to recover the amount of money that I'm going to put into the case, because a third of $2,500 is just not going to cover my overhead, my expense, the other lawyers, the staff, and so on and so forth. And so they might turn down your case simply because it's not enough money to cover expenses, overhead, etc. So just keep that in mind, that an attorney evaluates your case on an individual basis. And if it's a personal injury case, they do so by evaluating or analyzing the potential maximum amount of damages that you can recover. That's how they determine whether or not it's a worthwhile investment. Now, the same thing is true for a collection case. Let's say you have a collection case and you're owed $1,000, and you go to an attorney and he says, look, I'll write a letter for you for a third if we recover, but I'm not going to do anything else. Well, why would that be? Well, what the attorney is thinking is, if I take 30% of recovery and it's $1,000 that you're owed, if I write a letter, that's $300. I can do that. But if it goes beyond that, I can't afford to continue on in a case when all I'm going to make potentially is $300. That's the way they evaluate it. Now, let me just say this. There are some attorneys out there that are extremely fair, honest, open with what they do, and they explain things to you so that you have an understanding of why they can't take the case. And there are other attorneys out there, and unfortunately, it seems like the majority of attorneys are dismissive. They don't have time. They don't want to be bothered because it's all about the money. And, I want to explain how the practice of law at a smaller or mid-sized firm works and how it differs from that of a large firm. If you are going to a solo practitioner, a small office, or even a mid-sized office, you have to understand as a potential client that it's extremely expensive to operate a business, but it's even more so expensive to operate a legal practice. There is a tremendous amount of overhead associated with owning a legal practice. There are malpractice insurance premiums you have to pay. There's the typical premiums you'd pay as a business, workers' comp and business liability insurance and that sort of thing. There's also bar fees and registrations and continuing legal education courses and things that you have to pay for, not to mention, obviously, salary of staff and other attorneys. So, a lot of times people will think, oh my God, this lawyer's just a mercenary. He just wants money. And unfortunately, it's true for a lot of lawyers that that's how they operate. But for those lawyers that are high quality, good, honest, open, and communicative lawyers, they might not be able to accept your case simply because they can't afford to take the case, because they have all of this overhead. Does that make sense? So sometimes you're going to run into those lawyers that are just greedy, but other times you'll find a lawyer who listens to you and talks to you and wishes they could help you, but they have to turn down your case simply because they can't afford it. And that would be a situation where perhaps you went to a solo practitioner with your $1,000 collection case, and he or she says, I'll write a letter, but that's all I can do. And if I write a letter, it's still going to be $1,000. That's the most that you're going to get. I'm going to get $300. That's why. Okay. And that's, just something I want to touch on, because sometimes it's very easy to just group all lawyers together. And the unfortunate reality is that so many lawyers are like that. So many of them are mercenaries. So many of them just don't take the time to explain. And I understand it as putting myself in a client's position. I can only imagine the level of frustration when you're either calling an attorney about a potential case or you're looking for an explanation and nobody wants to talk to you because you didn't pay them. And I can also understand it on the flip side where an attorney says, if I spend all this time, how am I going to get paid? And while I'm giving all this information and advice, there's no way for me to recover any money. I'm going to be out of business. And so that's the balancing act that has to be done. But there is a way, a nice, proper way for an attorney to communicate that to you. And quite frankly, I think that being open and honest with a potential client is the way to go. I personally am a big believer that if you cannot afford to take the case, why not explain that to the client? Why not say, listen, your case is so involved and it involves so many hours, so much manpower necessary to take this case. I am not equipped to handle that case. I think you have a claim. I think you should explore it with an attorney, but I think you might need to see somebody at a larger firm where they have the resources and manpower to handle the case. So that's what you should be hearing when an attorney is telling you that they can't take your case simply because they're too small or they can't afford to handle it. So I know this was an aside. I know this kind of jumped a little bit away from the question about contingency fees, but I feel it's important to explain, sort of the rationale behind some of the decisions that drive attorneys with respect to accepting or refusing to take cases. So that's going to do it for today's legal question. And I hope that I brought some light to this topic about contingency fees and when an attorney takes a contingency fee case. I hope that it's more clear now to you. And the next time that you speak to an attorney and you're talking contingency fees, you have an understanding of, what sort of case would be appropriate for a contingency fee and which sort of case would not. Now, again, we've received a lot of questions concerning pro se representation, and we're going to be talking about that over the course of the next few weeks because I think it's an important thing. In particular, we've been asked to explain how one would write a summary judgment motion. And so we're going to do some videos on that as well as answer some of those individual questions on upcoming episodes of Business and Legal Q&A Live. So stay tuned for them. If you are representing yourself and you have a summary judgment motion that you have to draft, this is going to be really, I think, helpful for you to understand how summary judgment motions should be crafted, regardless of what jurisdiction you are in. So stay tuned for that. Also, I want to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have a good amount of information being put up on a weekly basis in addition to the live broadcast, which those of you who are joining me live on YouTube are seeing right now. But we do some other videos, some law basics videos where we talk about legal issues or business issues, and it's very helpful to you guys out there. At least that's what your feedback is telling me, and I greatly appreciate your feedback. I want to help, and I want to shed some light onto the mystery of law and being an attorney, and give some guidance into how to be successful in business. So, your feedback is so tremendously important to me, and I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody who has recently subscribed to the YouTube channel. But if you've not subscribed yet, just make sure you click on the subscribe button so that you're notified when new videos are posted. I also want to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, and just go over to iTunes, search up, Understanding the Law, or my name, Peter Lamont, and you will have the link to the iTunes subscription. Click on that, and then you'll be notified when new episodes are available for download. You can also find all of our links to social media and to our contact pages on UTLRadio.com. And as I mentioned during yesterday's show, make sure you check out UTLRadio.com on a regular basis, because we're constantly upgrading it and adding new content. We're going to be working on a forms page where you're going to have the ability to download forms, which hopefully will be helpful. There's also the Ask Your Question page on the website, and that allows you to ask your legal or business question directly through your computer. Just record it directly to your computer, and we'll get notification of that and be able to play that question live on the air during our business and legal Q&A sessions. So I encourage you to do that. That is at utlradio.com. If you have questions or comments, or you want more information, just drop a comment or a note in either the or on the website. You can do it through email, or on the YouTube page in the comments section, or on Blog Talk Radio. But there's tons of ways to get in touch with us, and I encourage you to reach out and do it if you have a business or legal question that you would like answered. And before we go, I just want to again thank our show's sponsor. And today's show, again, was sponsored by the Global Influencer Podcast. And, it's, again, an excellent podcast if you are in the fashion industry, or if you are trying to get your brand to grow on a global level. So I encourage you also to subscribe to the Global Influencer and to check out lunavega.net. Links to the page will be in the show notes below, so check that out. Subscribe to that podcast. It's another excellent source of information for entrepreneurs, for fashion designers, or for those of you who are, again, seeking to expand your business globally. So thank you to Luna Vega and to the Global Influencer Podcast for sponsoring today's show. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Business and Legal Q&A Live. Tune in Monday when I am back with my co-host Bob Hughes for Business and Legal Week in Review. We talk about some of the top news stories in business and law that occurred this week, and we'll give you some opinions and commentary and an explanation as to why some of these things happened, or what we could be expecting in the future for some of the stories. So tune into that on Monday. We're back also with Business and Legal Q&A Live next week, and we are working on a brand new interview segment for the Thursday show, Understanding Business. And finally, and I'd like some comments or feedback on this idea, we are looking at putting together a Wednesday show that involves business, law, and music. For those of you who tune into the Monday show, you know that my co-host Bob Hughes is a musician, and I've handled a lot of entertainment law type clients, and we were thinking about putting together a show where we feature a band or an artist, and we talk about some of their challenges and successes in music, but with a business and legal spin to it. So, for example, we would hope to talk to somebody like Lars Ulrich from Metallica and talk about his legal battle back when Napster was first at the forefront of file sharing. And maybe we talk to somebody else about their success in business and how they did it in marketing and social media. So let me know what you think about that idea. We're trying to put that together, and hopefully that will be airing live on Wednesdays in the very near future. I'd like to get it up and running by the end of this month, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. That's going to do it for today. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for putting up with the nature sounds, the airplanes and the birds and squirrels and whatever. That's going to do it. We're not going to have outro music today, again, because of our on location status, but hopefully this was a helpful show, and please make sure to tune in next week, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, and remember that there's power in understanding the law.